Sophie Kerr, a prolific and popular American writer of the early 20th century, was born on the eastern shore of Maryland in 1880. Over the course of her career, she published 23 novels and 500 short stories and articles in the most popular magazines of her day. A voracious reader and industrious writer, she defied the odds by achieving success and supporting herself on her earnings. Her bequest to Washington College in 1965 specified that the interest from the endowment be used for scholarships and books and to bring visiting writers and scholars to campus. The result is a culture where the literary arts thrive. Allen Ginsberg, Toni Morrison, Joyce Carol Oates, Junot Diaz. These are just a few of the literary greats who have inspired the next generation of writers at Washington College. The Sophie Kerr Prize is awarded each year to the graduating senior who has the best ability and promise for future fulfillment in the field of literary endeavor. Valued at more than $60,000 in 2013, it is the nation's largest literary prize awarded to undergraduates. Since its inception, the prize endowment has awarded more than $1.4 million. As many as 40 applicants per year vie for the prize, submitting critical essays, poetry, fiction, creative nonfiction, journalism, stage plays, and graphic novels for consideration. In the past, the prize has been awarded both for creative and for critical writing. Previous winners include Peter Turchi, author of 5 books and a professor at Arizona State University, short story writer Laura Maylene Walter, poet Catherine Degentesh, and novelist Christine Lincoln. The prize continues to attract aspiring writers and scholars to Washington College, where they learn that great writing is the heart of the liberal arts experience.
To welcome you to the Central Library of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore. I'm Carla Hayden, the CEO, and I have to tell you, to be the host for the most exciting award ceremony in literature, in a place that houses the great authors, I have to say Poe, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, H.L. Mencken, and Laura Lippman, who set one of her mysteries right here in the Pratt Library. You may also know that the Central Library here in Baltimore is Maryland State Library, so it's really fitting that the award is here in Maryland and back here. Our special guests, I must tell you, I have a special affinity with Washington College. I've been proud to have been a board member and been part of the Washington College family. So President and Mrs. Reese, right here. Also, our guest speaker, and we're going to really make sure that he knows a little bit more about us, Washington Post literary critic Michael Dirda, and our new best friend, Ms. Kate Moncrief, the chair of Washington College's English Department, and Janae DeBrow, director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House and assistant professor of English. And of course, all of the finalists for the Sophie Kerr Literary Award, the parents, the faculty, staff, and special guests. In this time of instant access and everybody clicking and tweeting and twittering, and we are live streaming, there's still the power of words to connect and express thoughts that carry a greater impact, we think, in today's fast-paced world. So tonight, we celebrate the remarkable works of these students who are, we hope, going to keep literary arts alive. So thank you again, and enjoy this wonderful night.
Hello and welcome. My name is Kate Moncrief, and I'm the chair of the English Department and the Sophie Kerr Committee at Washington College. This is the 46th year that we're going to award the Sophie Kerr Prize, and I'm delighted that you could all join us on this exciting occasion. I want to also introduce the members of the Sophie Kerr Committee, many of whom are here today, and just thank them for their work in adjudicating this prize. Professors Richard and Barbara Gillen, Bob Mooney, Kathy Wagner, Jean Dubrow, Sean Meehan, Alicia Knight, Phil Walsh, and Crystal Curzon. I also want to welcome some of our former Sophie Kerr Prize winners. Tonight's the night to hand over the crown. We have last year's winner, Katie Mannion, Liam Daly from '07, Brandon Hopkins from '97, Doug Rose from '86, and Michelle Balze from '89. So welcome back. I also get the pleasure of thanking people who made this event possible, those who worked to honor Sophie Kerr and our promising writers, particularly Carla Hayden. I can think of no better place, just look around this wonderful library, I can think of no better place to honor Sophie Kerr and to have an evening honoring writers and writing, and the special relationship that Washington College has with the Pratt Library. So thank you very much to Carla. Also, I want to thank Jeff Christ, who hosted us at the Gilman School earlier today. Our students got a practice run, and we got to meet some of their promising writers, so thank you for that. Also, board member Debbie Turner, who hosted our students for dinner. Everybody's been treated very well, so thank you to everyone for helping make this event possible. I really also want to take a moment to talk about Sophie Kerr. Who here has heard of Sophie Kerr? Everyone? Who here has read her writing? Okay, so you're in for a little treat then. I want to tell you a little bit about Sophie Kerr, whose legacy we honor here today. Sophie Kerr was born on the Eastern Shore of Maryland in 1880, and she earned both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree when neither were yet common for women. She purchased a house in New York and lived there from 1920 until her death in 1965 at the age of 84. Over the course of her 40-year career, she served as managing editor of the Women's Home Companion, published 23 novels, 500 short stories, numerous articles in the most popular magazines of her day, including Collier's and the Saturday Evening Post. She saw a play she wrote run on Broadway, and then it was turned into a Hollywood film, the blockbuster Big-Hearted Herbert, 1934. She was a successful independent woman who supported herself on her earnings. She was a voracious reader and an industrious writer who wrote on subject matter everything from love and romance to cookery and cats. In 1941, Kerr published an essay, Maryland's Eastern Shore, in Home and Garden magazine. So I'd like to share just one paragraph with you so you can hear Sophie's voice tonight. If you have not had the luck to be born on the Eastern Shore, you cannot know its people. You may know the fruitful country of wide fields laced by silver tidewater rivers and creeks. You may know the woods of pine and oak and sweet gum with their undergrowth of laurel and sassafras, and in low-lying spots, the spice-scented exquisite little Magnolia glauca. You may know the excellent main roads and the sandy rutted shortcuts and backtracks. You may know the towns with the tree-shaded streets and comfortable porches where soothing rocking chairs invite the guest. You may know the great mansions of past and present, some of them with faces lifted by northern cash money. You may read the newspapers and do business in the banks and get your mail at the post office and go to card parties and eat superb crab salad and chocolate cake. But nonetheless, if you were not born there, you will not truly know the people. You will like them. You will enjoy their unconscious, perfect resistance to neurotic pressure. But now and then, you will find yourselves amazed and baffled and even devastated by a glimpse of what lies beneath their calm and friendly exteriors. So that's Sophie. Although 3 of Sophie Kerr's novels are set on the Eastern Shore, most are set in New York City, with a plucky heroine who travels there from a small town to seek her fortune, a pattern that Kerr herself followed by moving from Denton to Pittsburgh to New York City. Her Murray Hill brownstone became a center for Kerr's group of literary and theater friends, and its sale enriched the Sophie Kerr Prize. As most of you know, over 40 years ago, when Sophie Kerr left money to Washington College in her will, she stipulated that half the annual earnings be given each year to the graduating senior who shows the most literary promise. The Sophie Kerr Prize, this year, $61,192, is, we believe, the largest undergraduate literary prize in the world. She specified that her money be spent on scholarships for promising writers, books, campus visits by writers and scholars, and as a result, over 200 well-known writers, including Gwendolyn Brooks, Allen Ginsberg, Toni Morrison, Robert Pinsky, Jane Smiley, and Ted Kooser, and many others have read from their works on campus. Kerr's decision to dedicate the fortune she made as a writer to nurturing and encouraging young writers has made Washington College a literary haven and is what brings us all, readers and creative writers, scholars and students of literature, here today. And now I will turn the podium over to my colleague, the director of the Rose O'Neal Literary House, Dr. Jean Dubrow.
Thank you, Professor Moncrief. I want to begin by calling your attention to our first Sophie Kerr Prize anthology, which was created to commemorate this event. Edited and designed by a Washington College student, Ariel Jaika, the Sophie Kerr Prize anthology was released through the Literary House Press, which is the publishing arm of the Rose O'Neal Literary House. The anthology will be available for purchase here at the library following tonight's event. Writers read. That's one of the first things we tell students when they enter the creative writing classroom. Read, 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 our students hear us say over and over again during their 4 years at Washington College. We assign them books, we lend them books, we give them lists of books to read over the summer. Read this, we say. Being a writer means finding your own voice, even as you read and study the writers who came before you. New writers use imitation, collage, and pastiche to make poems of his own. The journeyman uses allusions to assert her place in the literary community. And both the emerging and the established writer learn where their words fit in the larger conversation when their books are reviewed. When at last a thoughtful, educated critic talks about why these books matter and why we should read them. In the columns and articles of Michael Dirda, we find what I like to think of as the ideal reviewer. He is thoughtful and educated, a reader who has the ability not only to summarize the text, but also to provide historical and cultural context, to articulate why a book is art or entertainment or both, why it should move us, why it will change us. Dirda, who was once described in the Paris Review as the man who seems to have read everything and then read everything about everything. Dirda's reviews advocate for writers and for the very act of reading itself. He performs a service both for the authors whose books he discusses and for the reading public. In a recent review of The Hand of Cornelius Voigt, a novel first published by Oliver Onions in 1939, Dirda closes his review by speaking about Valcour Books, the press which reissued this forgotten classic. In a time when both commercial and independent presses are fighting to stay solvent, the regard of an influential critic can mean the difference between book sales and book remainders. And even as the venues for publishing reviews of literature have dwindled over the past 10 years, Michael Dirda has remained one of the essential voices in contemporary criticism. There's no question why we trust Dirda when it comes to all things literary. Since 1978, he has served as weekly book columnist for the Washington Post. In 1993, he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for distinguished criticism. He is the author of a memoir and of 4 collections of essays. His latest book, On Conan Doyle, won the 2012 Edgar Award. His articles and reviews have appeared in the New York Review of Books, in Harper's, and in the Wall Street Journal, among others. He has written introductions for books as diverse as Isaac Asimov's The Foundation Trilogy, Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, and Isaac Babel's Red Cavalry. And although I imagine it must sting a little to receive a poor review from Dirda, it would be impossible for any author to deny that here is a critic who loves books and reading, who has given decades to his passion for language. In Classics for Pleasure, Dirda lays out the project of his book, but he could just as easily be speaking about his own work in general. Think of what follows as a guide to good reading, a collection of love letters to favorite books, an expansion of the canon. Indeed, Dirda, the reviewer and essayist, is alternatingly literary guide, lover of books, and cheerleader of the overlooked or much maligned genres of mystery, horror, and science fiction. In an open book, Dirda recounts a life spent inside books, what we might call a study of reading habits, to quote Philip Larkin. The memoir ends on this gentle note. I now wish I had sat down with pen and paper more often than with an old paperback, had tilted my days more toward being a writer than a reader. Still, who knows? Perhaps even now, it's not altogether too late. Clearly, Mr. Dirda is being far too modest here. He is not only one of the great professional readers of our time, but also a scholar, a teacher, and an author in his own right. Anyone who has read his columns and books can attest to the fact that a writer's life must be spent in reading and reading and more reading. Please help to give a warm welcome to Michael Dirda.
Before I go too far, too long, can you all hear me okay? Okay, signal wildly if you can't. Many thanks for those kind and generous introduction. I'm greatly honored to be here this evening, at these festivities celebrating undergraduate writing at Washington College. Let me begin with some words of consolation. One of you will be the happy recipient of the Sophie Kerr Prize, worth, as we know, a considerable amount of money. But the other 4 here tonight will need to hold back their tears and put on a brave smile. It will make little difference to hear, as you may, that the choice of this year's Sophie Kerr winner was a difficult decision. In fact, it will make it seem worse. That little voice in your head will cry out, if only I tried a little harder, had run that last paragraph through my typewriter, to use an old-fashioned metaphor, one more time. No, you will feel heartbroken for a while. But if you are meaning to pursue a literary career, it's best to get used to that feeling right away. The great French writer Colette, author of Gigi, Chérie, and many other books, once said that to become a writer was to take on a vocation of unhappiness. Yes, unhappiness. Well, there may be occasional successes, occasional prizes and recognitions. There will also be the books that don't quite work out and that you have to scrap after 6 months of hard work. Books that critics pan, or even worse, praise with wan, faint praise. Books that no publisher wants. Books that don't sell and then disappear seemingly forever. Unhappiness. As the great American sports writer Red Smith once said, writing is easy. You just sit down at a typewriter and open a vein. When I was in high school, there existed awards called senior superlatives. You probably had them at your schools, where the class would vote on the most intelligent, the best looking, the most athletic, things like that. As it happens, I was shortlisted for several of these prizes, but won none of them. And so one of my more waggish friends dubbed me most likely to just miss succeeding. That's how writing often feels. Meanwhile, if you're a writer, you're pouring your heart out in your work, you're using every element of craft and cunning you know, and you're probably working to pay the bills as a waitress, or maybe a teacher, or perhaps you've inveigled your parents into supporting you for another year or two. And then people see you sitting around all day and assume you are doing nothing. And it's always tempting, in fact, to do nothing. Why not play video games for a couple of hours? Or have a beer in the afternoon? Or maybe go out to the thrift shop and look for designer shoes? Ezra Pound once said that more poets fail through lack of character than for any other reason. To be a writer, you have to love sitting in a chair for hours on end while putting words down on paper or on a screen and then fiddling with them. Why would you do this? Because regardless of how good a writer you actually may or may not be, only writing seems to satisfy your soul. Only writing makes you, in some sense, happy. And I don't mean the joy in having written, but actually in writing itself. One of the great benefits of being a journalist is that you know that every day, or at least every week, you will have to sit down and write something. After more than 35 years of reviewing books, I still feel, whenever I start typing the title of a new book I'm reviewing, the latest work of taking on, I still feel a deep, deep peace come over me. I'm where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. A story. I come from a working class background and was always a rather cavalier student in high school, a high school famous only for the high level of its juvenile delinquency. I received a D in English in the first grading period of my senior year. But I did love to read. And as Kate has said, reading is, of course, the key element if you want to become a writer. You need to read a lot, you need to read widely, you need to read all the time. There's no better teacher. It is the only great teacher, really. But besides loving to read, I also had a knack for scoring strangely well on standardized tests. So, this is a school where almost nobody went to college. And I wrote a letter to the only college I'd heard of, which was nearby, 13 miles away, Oberlin College. And I said to them, if you would give me a scholarship or a loan and a job, I will work really, really hard, and one day you will be proud of me. Well, for some reason, the admissions officer bought this argument, and I worked hard and eventually did do well in the eyes of many. But my father always judged me a failure. If I was so smart, why wasn't I really rich, with a Cadillac and a house on a hill and a swimming pool? No matter what I said to him about my job, he couldn't take writing book reviews seriously. It wasn't the kind of work a grown man he felt should be doing. He himself never read any books. Well, I decided to win the Pulitzer Prize in criticism to impress him. He'd heard of that. In 1993, I finally did win after losing for 3 years in a row, but by then he'd been dead from cancer for 6 months. That too is part of the writing life. of life in general. The rewards or the recognitions will come eventually if you persist. But they almost never come at the right time, when you most want and need them. They usually arrive when you are nearly, if not quite, indifferent to them. Others are indifferent to them too. My mother, who is now 90, believes in the balance, the Tao of the universe, so to speak. If something good happens to you or your family, that means something bad will happen to your family or you in the near future. There's a balance. Compensation is always going on in the universe, yin and yang. So I called my mom up 20 years ago and said, Mom, I won the Pulitzer Prize. Long pause on the phone, and then she said, well, guess there's no point in going to bingo tonight. I don't generally like to give advice, but appropriately enough, I do like stories. To me, the two best pieces of advice for young writers both come from great musicians. One is a story told about Jascha Heifetz, or some other violin virtuoso. There was a boy, a young man, who had been taking violin lessons for years and felt he had the makings of a concert career. One day, Heifetz came to his town, performed, and was persuaded to listen to the young man play. At the end of the session, Heifetz looked up and said, I'm sorry, but you will never be a violinist. The young man was crushed. He gave up playing and went off and got an MBA and entered business and made a fortune. 25 years later, Heifetz came again to his town, and again the man, now middle-aged, requested a private audience. This time, he spoke to the musician. 25 years ago, you told me I'd never be a violinist. You broke my heart. Heifetz looked into his eyes and said, if you truly had it in you to be a violinist, if you actually wanted that life more than any other, nothing I said could have made any difference. That's the first story. Here's the second. The great pianist Arthur Schnabel is revered as arguably the greatest performer of Beethoven's sonatas of all time. And yet, if you listen to his records, or CDs, you will hear as his fingers go machine gunning through the Hammer Clavier Sonata or some of the others, an occasional mistake, a wrong note, a missed key. An admirer once asked Schnabel why he didn't play more perfectly, with a little more caution and restraint, to which the maestro replied bluntly, safety last. It was only by pushing himself, by risking failure, and making the occasional mistake that he could achieve the magnificence of his greatest performance. Safety last. To the winner of this year's Sophie Kerr Prize, whomever it may be, I'd like to add a burden to the happiness and joy of today. People believe that you have gifts, talent, possible greatness. You have an obligation to justify that belief. It doesn't matter if you fail, if nobody ever hears of you or you're writing again. But right now, you need to try and try hard. You have taken money from 4 others who have dreamt of what it could do to foster their own careers. You need to be worthy of them. And to those of you whose names won't be called, I know how you feel. I've sat where you have and longed to hear my name announced, and it wasn't. Just this month, a few weeks ago. I was one of 4 finalists for the Marfield Prize, a National Arts Award worth $10,000. They called another name. But as my mother would say, if you don't play, you can't win. By that I mean, you may have lost today, but you never know about the future. Consider this. Why I Live at the P.O., one of Eudora Welty's greatest and most famous stories, was rejected by The New Yorker, Collier's, Harper's Bazaar, Mademoiselle, Harper's Magazine, and even Good Housekeeping. At the famous Breadloaf Writers' Workshop, the unanimous opinion was that nobody would ever buy her equally famous story, Powerhouse. As you probably know, before her death, Eudora Welty was the first living writer to see her work published in the Library of America. So here's my valedictory wish. May all 5 of you here this evening come to write as badly as Miss Welty. Thank you. The 5 finalists will each be reading brief passages from their work, and I will be going in alphabetical order. I'll be introducing each of them. So please welcome first Emily Blackner.
This is an excerpt, excuse me. This is an excerpt from a personal essay titled, "Please Come to Chicago." It occurs about a third of the way through the piece when I'm interviewing my mother for a history project. It had somehow escaped my notice up until this point that she was only 14 years old in 1972, not old enough to vote. So why did you feel so strongly about McGovern to campaign so hard for him? I asked. I realized that whatever the decisions the president made would affect me and my friends, would affect everyone, whether through Vietnam or segregation or anything. It was, in fact, our problem. And so I felt I needed to stay on top of things and keep informed, she responded. She turned to McGovern specifically because she and the college Democrats groups with which she worked saw him as a reformer, someone fundamentally different from the stereotypical politician represented by the incumbent. It made me feel guilty. Here I was, 2 years older than my mother had been when she began political participation in earnest, and I had hardly followed the previous election at all. The bright pink walls of my room and the horse posters torn from countless calendars that adorned them seemed especially childish. I shifted uneasily. It was at this point that Chicago first entered my radar. "It still makes me cry," she said, as I was in the middle of scribbling down her previous thought. "Wait, what does?" I asked. She told me that around the time she was campaigning, a song called Chicago came out, and it had really spoken to her, gotten her fired up to participate, like an anthem for the campaign. Wary of her singing ability, she told me I should look it up. Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and sometimes, Mom would add, with raised pointer finger, Young, wrote the song in 1970 as a direct result of the Chicago riots. It is even dedicated to Mayor Daley on the album on which it appears, Four-Way Street. The opening lines of the song refer directly to Bobby Seale, one of those arrested in the aftermath. "Though your brother's bound and gagged, and they've tied him to a chair." Seale was physically restrained after repeated outbursts in court. His trial was severed halfway through the proceedings amid much controversy over how he was treated. The song is Nash's way of pleading with his bandmates to join the fray and come to Chicago in protest of the entire situation. But he is also speaking to the public at large, to anyone who saw what was happening around the nation and wondered, in a land that's known as freedom, how can such a thing be fair? My mom felt that the song really captured the essence of her generation's struggle for political change. It was like we all knew this was going on, and we're all upset by it, and so the question became, how do we fix it? And that's what the song did, gave us an outlet and a rallying cry. Of course, change didn't come. Nixon won the election in a landslide, although he kind of cheated, which came to light a few years later when the Watergate scandal broke. Instead of feeling vindicated in her dislike of Richard Nixon, Mom described her feelings as saddened, but not really surprised. I had jotted down Chicago, CSNY in the top corner margin of my notebook, trying to be polite to her in acknowledging this major influence as I gathered the hard facts I associated with history presentations. But I had a few minutes free that evening, so I did look up the song. I found a website that was streaming it for free, so I gave it a listen, and then another, and another, and then I went to iTunes and purchased the song for myself.
Thank you, Emily. Next will be Maegan Clearwood.
This is the conclusion to a personal narrative about a campus literary event called Poetry and Project Runway, in which I had a rather unconventional role. And the piece is called Character Sketch. One of the unofficial traits of being a good drama major is immodesty. Before a performance, girls are usually traipsing around the dressing room in nylons and bras, crooning show tunes while jokingly groping and teasing each other. After 12 years of performing, I still aim to spend as little time as possible in the dressing room. I usually arrive earlier than any of the other actors, hair and makeup already done. Then I scurry to a bathroom stall to change and then rush to the green room. I'm not sure where my consistent discomfort with dressing room ritual comes from, but as I settled onto my stool hours before that runway show, I tried to convince myself that this time would be different. This time I would enjoy, not simply endure, being pampered. After all, the models on Project Runway always seem to look forward to the L'Oreal hair and makeup session. Why shouldn't I feel the same? I'd performed in front of an audience more than anyone else in that room. I had clamored to be on stage since my second grade debut as a singing monkey. I'd been on stage in a purple tutu, sang and danced in a wig and showgirl costume, even orated a commencement speech for a gymnasium of thousands. Now, as Andre collected his models, starched and powdered and perfect, I should have felt more confident than ever. I had no lines, no blocking. All I had to do was walk. But I recognized the waves of panic drenching my head, my chest, my legs. It was the terror of an actor forgetting her lines before an entrance. There's something eerily stoic about walking into an empty theater right before showtime. The space is like a fresh blanket of snow, blaringly silent, almost sacred, and I felt like an imposter as Andre herded the five of us on stage. He lined us up in order of our appearance and then moved center stage to demonstrate the walk. He swaggered from the curtain to the edge of the stage, paused, struck a lopsided, unnatural pose, and then swaggered back. One at a time, we wobbled across the catwalk for an imaginary audience. But the walk isn't something one learns. It is something a true model is born with. And Andre's notes were as convoluted and deceptively simple as his beloved Mobius loops. He told us to slow down, but stay deliberate. Our arms could move, but not distractingly so. Our pose was supposed to be elegant, yet firm. I was 19 years old, relearning how to walk. The pure aimlessness of his track had rendered my arms and legs half paralyzed, and I ached for some kind of purpose. Taw's Theater was a place for storytelling. I wanted a character, a motivation, a rising action, climax, resolution. Luckily, like any good director, Andre had character notes for his actors. Now, girls, you look beautiful, you look sexy, I want you to feel it. You need to show the audience, he said. Here's what I want you to be thinking while you're walking down that catwalk. You want to fuck me? Well, you can't. That's the face you need to have. I never remember much from actual performances. My mind is too clouded with being in character to remember anything other than hazy stage lights and shadowy faces peeping through. But I remember my modeling debut in crisp detail. I remember running Andre's words of wisdom through my head before my entrance over and over again. You want to fuck me? Well, you can't. You want to fuck me? Well, you can't. I remember navigating along the thin, craggly line to the edge of the stage. I remember popping my hip and deliberately looking at the lights above me instead of the eyes in front. I remember the talk back after, listening and silently posing in my chair because no one asked the models anything. I remember scraping the makeup off my face with a wet towel, but still waking up with a rainbow stain on my pillow. I remember being so completely in character that the world beyond the stage melted away. I was playing a model. She never succumbed to stage fright or nerves or weakness, so neither did I. I remember embodying my character completely, but I don't remember her thinking anything at all.
Thank you, Maegan. Next up will be Tim Marcin.
So for this prize, we all had to submit a portfolio, and the only thing you had to have was an introduction, so I'm going to read you that. An introduction to obsessions. Professor Leslie Harrison taught me about rectangles, and some would call them just a shape, but in truth, they're everywhere. Think about it. We put our belongings, many of which are rectangular, into rectangles, move into a rectangular house with rectangle walls and rectangle windows and rectangle skylights and rectangle doors, all of which we paid for with thousands and thousands of imaginary rectangles. I wrote this on a sheet of rectangle, on a carved rectangle, with a Ticonderoga No. 2, that when you examine it closely, has rectangles running up the cylinder. It was an obsession for Leslie. Dive, she said, or jump, or explore, or dig, or just stare blank until something, anything, is persistent. And that's where the gold is. Write it. That's the heart of the thing, what makes the viscous words move. So I thought, Springsteen and Dylan, not necessarily that they are my favorite musicians, but when Springsteen sings, it's authentic. And not that his worlds exist, not literally, but that to him, it's authentic. And Thunder Road exists simply because he tells you it does. And Dylan, with the harmonica and a voice like chalk, so sure that his coughing and crackling is what you need to hear. Also, waking up, or rather, the in-between moment, when the morning is out of focus and you are still half of a dream person. Time is reconditioned and identity is little pieces your mind has patchworked into that brief jumble of seconds. And water chestnuts, the coarse texture, completely its own. Baseball, drinking, not partying, but the lonesome ritual of a drink. And other things, neon colors, the unnatural luminescent buzz of a bar sign, nature and the oddities of it all, the creek that runs thick with sludge and how the sway of the Atlantic is a song. And these things, like fruit flies, multiply and manifest, then inch their way into my words. It is not that they are the point of it all, but rather the avenue. Hemingway said he would write one true sentence, and that would remind him how to write. To me, there is truth in a ground ball skipping near the dirt, or a man with a whiskey and a few hours until sleep. So I wrote words, and sentences, and lines, and stanzas, and paragraphs, and articles, and stories. Whatever felt like the right medium, what lent itself just so. Obsessions or nagging thoughts made their way into something physical. I had pages. My obsessions, my rectangles, are many, and some I listed earlier, some I didn't. They do not matter, not really. What matters is if they provided a clearing, a way to raise away the proverbial gunk that mucks up the world. I took obsessions and irksome thoughts and put them in words because I wanted to cleanse something worldly into a distinct experience, something that I hoped was recognizable, enjoyable, even beautiful. And writing is wrangling an overwhelming world and condensing it into something lucid, almost inherent, like a tiny aperture capturing a big blue sky.
Thank you, Tim. Our next reader is Jillian Obermeier.
Hi, everybody. This is a very pared-down excerpt from my senior thesis. When he was just 22, James Joyce wrote to his wife, Nora, about his disillusionments. My mother was slowly killed, I think, by my father's ill treatment. When I looked on her face as she lay in her coffin, a face gray and wasted with cancer, I understood that I was looking on the face of a victim, and I cursed the system which had made her a victim. Joyce recognizes that he can no longer believe in his parents having any power outside of that which his father had to ruin his mother. In The Dead, Joyce gives these failings over to his character Gabriel Conroy, and through his writing restores the power to judge, condemn, and free himself from this behavior. The most important female over whom Gabriel believes he has power is his wife, Greta. She seemed to him so frail that he longed to defend her against something, and then to be alone with her. If she would only turn to him or come to him of her own accord, to take her as she was would be brutal. As Gabriel is thinking about his supposed strength and power, however, Joyce and Greta are constructing a trap that will destroy Gabriel's perception of his control forever. Greta reveals to Gabriel that while he has been imagining all sorts of passionate relations between them on the ride home, she has been thinking back to a relationship she had as a young girl with a boy named Michael Fury. This revelation and immediate loss of power destroys him. Gabriel felt humiliated by the failure of his irony and by this evocation of the figure from the dead, a boy in the gasworks. While he had been full of memories of their secret life together, full of tenderness and joy and desire, she had been comparing him in her mind to another. A shameful consciousness of his own person assailed him. Gabriel's embracing of patriarchal power has led to an impasse that paralyzes him completely. At the end of the story, Gabriel is lying in bed, very aware of his weakness and humanity, and unable to see a way in which he can regain the power he lost. Joyce very cleverly places his story during the holidays, and the reader can therefore assume that it is the Christmas season, but not Christmas, and that it is closer to New Year's, but that too has passed. The only holiday left in Ireland is the Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th. Thus, Gabriel has an epiphany about his artificial power on the Feast of the Epiphany, and the discovery of his own morality metaphorically crucifies him. Gabriel thinks about how the snow lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns, and brings the image of the crucifixion very clearly to mind. However, any redemption is not for the protagonist, but for Joyce, against Gabriel's and his father's faults, and an Easter, or resurrection, follows the crucifixion within the story. Gabriel is crucified, but Joyce is reborn through his own literary power. Joyce is examining Gabriel's nature, the nature that led him to believe he had control as a man over a woman, and the nature that led him to become paralyzed, unable to find a new source of power to replace his own loss. Throughout Dubliners, Joyce uses these types of representations to flaunt his own power and mastery. He proves that he has overcome the failings of his own father and the struggles that his characters symbolize by revisiting and replacing them with the triumphs of a literary master. It is easy for readers to imagine that Joyce, while artfully describing his character's paralysis, is delighting in his own freedom, creating a legacy that far surpasses his family and his characters.
Thank you, Jillian. Our last reader will be Bond Richards.
Hello. I am reading 4 poems to you guys. First attempt. Straw dogs or rain dogs, more brittle words forced through a temperament. The whole is the thing of braided centuries, incomplete spaces converging, syllable after syllable of you're just now sitting to rend the winds of rhetoric and failing. Poem. As westward the course of empire takes its way, my chicken soul dines in the east, pecking mines from memory. An axe swung at frozen seas, some strong motion there beneath the glace, a great yawning blue-black underfoot. Mine's more the dropping of stones down a well, a child's giddying cries at garbled sound. Cockeyed soul, simple bird, you see in everyone a child, and in every child a shaking you, shaking me, shaking you from the dream like a pink naked baby squirrel torn from a bag of mulch. Lip service. People kiss, and that too is done with lips. Pray no more on ether, but seed, steam, encunting soil. Your character, thus sustained, deserves a beard at least, should be caressed by its limits, not tortured by them. Seek only the wilderness, substantive, subject to primitivisms, shapes of the day's mean mess, shapes of the wilderness, pricked by the nagging bird call and yawn, the RKO, suspended beneath canvas stream, without window to self or other, the red yawn, distending a moment's mistake in the child, so kind, so sweet, a child, released, meets the matter, a proof for pleasure, limply sustained. Family fugue. 1. Exposition. Paradoxical undressing occurs in severe cases of hypothermia. Explicable undressing follows several drinks, the simplest base patterns. Either way, the mind slips like permutation of brass, of beating heart. A lilt without reason commands our wild, lonesome reaching to heaven or haven or meaning, then freezes. Development. The variants are one and the same, yes, only one and the same, never a true match ready-made in heaven. A series, the sublimated yes, no, the trance, a cool blue never mind. Take, for instance, this bit of sky, the trance, a never mind. A mind, a tremor, always a never mind push. The God particle, a never mind, also an extension of the topological dimension. Take the spines of this here snowflake. Look, read them. Recapitulation. Ice bath. Hot, momentous, high and mighty animal universe. Braided centuries, our stubborn genome. Push this series. Ice bath, semen-webbed, orgy-stained, paradise never lost its swagger, paradise in moments to obtain the delicious failing of the you and me and the sunken moments in between of brass and of beating heart. Ice bath, we are more than playthings. Thank you.
Thank you, Bond. Now we've come to the moment we've all been waiting for, or dreading. But before I open the envelope, let's have one last round of applause for these wonderful writers from Washington College. The winner of the 2013 Sophie Kerr Prize is Tim Marcin.
I've always wanted to pull an acceptance speech out of my pocket. just want to say thank you to my mom, my dad, my brother who couldn't make it because he's a teacher and he has work early in the morning. Thank you to the Altobelli family for coming. And to the other finalists, I don't know how this happened. I've read all of your work and it's amazing, and it's truly an honor just to be a part of this group. Thank you to the whole English department, all my professors, Professor DeVoe especially, because she was the one who kicked me in the butt and said keep writing. Leslie Harrison, because she's in my introduction. Thank you to my friends and everybody I met over the years, because I wrote a lot of creative nonfiction, and they were very interesting characters. In fact, I think some of them are watching the live feed in Ocean City right now. Hi, guys. I'm just truly honored, and I really can't say enough about how much I've loved Washington College, and I owe so much to this school. So thank you.
So one last congratulations to Bond, to Jillian, to Tim, to Maegan, and to Emily. And thank you all for joining us on this incredibly special night as we celebrate Sophie Kerr, Washington College, and the writing life. Thank you and good night.